The salvage ship Resilience drifted through the graveyard of dreams, its hull scarred by a dozen different wars. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the bridge viewport, watching the twisted remains of the colony ship New Eden tumble slowly in the void. 3 weeks had passed since the Zerathi attack, and the debris field stretched for millions of kilometers in all directions. "Picking up another life pod signal, Commander," reported Lieutenant Sarah Chen, her fingers dancing across the scanner console. "Bearing 27 Mark IV. Signal's weak, but it's there." Jake nodded grimly. In 3 weeks of searching, they'd found 47 life pods, 47 empty shells that had once held the hopes and dreams of families seeking a new life among the stars. The Zerathi didn't just kill, they made sure nothing survived to tell the tale. "Take us in, Chen." Standard approach. The Resilience turned its bulk toward the signal, magnetic grapples already extending from the cargo bay. This was their job now, collecting the evidence of humanity's latest defeat. The Earth Colonial Authority wanted every pod recovered, every data recorder analyzed. They were looking for patterns, weaknesses in Zerathi tactics that might help the next convoy survive. Jake didn't hold much hope. The Zerathi had been picking off human colonies for 5 years now, always staying one step ahead of the response fleets. They struck fast and vanished into the deep black, leaving nothing but debris and silence. The New Eden had been carrying 12,000 colonists to the Kepler system. Now it was just another monument to humanity's stubborn refusal to accept that maybe, just maybe, they didn't belong among the stars. "Pod secured, sir," reported Sergeant Torres from the cargo bay. "Running initial diagnostics now." Jake left the bridge and made his way to the cargo hold, his magnetic boots clanging against the deck plating. The salvage work was getting to him. Every empty pod felt like a personal failure, a reminder that, for all their advanced technology and fighting spirit, humans were still just meat and bone trying to survive in a universe that seemed determined to prove them wrong. The life pod sat in the center of the bay, its white ceramic hull cracked but intact. Emergency lights blinked weakly along its sides and frost covered the viewport. Jake had seen hundreds of these pods over the years. Standard Earth Colonial Authority design, capable of sustaining 8 people for 30 days. This one looked like it had taken a direct hit from Zerathi plasma fire. "Atmosphere is stable inside," Torres reported, scanning the pod with a handheld sensor. "But the heating system's been offline for at least 2 weeks. Whatever's in there has been frozen solid." Jake approached the viewport and wiped away the frost with his sleeve. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly red glow. He could make out 2 figures slumped in the acceleration couches. An adult and what looked like a child, both motionless. "Same as all the others," he muttered, but something made him look closer. The adult figure was clearly dead, frozen in the pod's failing life support. But the child... "Torres, get this thing open." "Now, sir, we haven't completed the full safety scan. Now, Sergeant." Torres didn't argue. He'd served under Jake Morrison for 3 years and knew that tone. The sergeant activated the pod's emergency release, and the hatch hissed open with a rush of frigid air. Jake climbed inside, his breath forming clouds in the sub-zero temperature. The adult was a woman, maybe 30 years old, wearing the simple jumpsuit of a colonial family. Her skin was blue-white with frostbite, her eyes closed forever. But in her arms, wrapped in her jacket, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Jake knelt beside them, his heart hammering as he reached for the child's neck. His gloved fingers found her throat, searching for something he was almost afraid to hope for. There. Weak, slower than it should be, but unmistakable. "A pulse. Medical team to Cargo Bay 1 emergency," he barked into his comm unit. "We have a survivor." Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived within minutes, her medical kit in hand and her dark hair pulled back in the efficient ponytail she always wore during emergencies. She took one look at the situation and immediately went to work, her scanner humming as it analyzed the child's vital signs. "Severe hypothermia, but she's alive," Vasquez reported, her voice tight with concentration. "Body temperature is 28 degrees Celsius. Another few hours and we would have been too late." How is this possible? Jake looked at the dead woman holding the child. The mother had wrapped her own jacket around her daughter, using her body heat as a shield against the cold. Even in death, her arms remained locked in a protective embrace. "She kept her warm," he said quietly. "Used her own body heat until the very end. They moved the child to the medical bay, leaving the mother's body for later processing." As Dr. Vasquez worked to slowly raise the girl's body temperature, Jake found himself pacing the corridors of his ship. In 5 years of war, this was the first survivor they'd pulled from the wreckage. The first sign that sometimes, against all odds, hope could outlast despair. "She's stabilizing," Vasquez reported when Jake returned to the medical bay hours later. The child lay on the treatment table, wrapped in thermal blankets and connected to a dozen different monitors. Her skin was still pale, but the blue tinge was fading. I've managed to bring her core temperature up to 35 degrees. She should regain consciousness soon. Any identification? Not on her. I checked the pod's data recorder, but it was damaged in the attack. We might be able to recover something from it back at headquarters. Jake pulled up a chair beside the treatment table and sat down. The girl looked so small under all those blankets. Her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. She had her mother's features. The same delicate nose, the same determined set to her jaw even in unconsciousness. "What's your name, little one?" he whispered. As if in response, her eyelids fluttered, brown eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. She looked around the medical bay with the bewildered expression of someone waking from a very long dream. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake leaned forward. "Hey there. You're safe now. My name is Jake. Can you tell me your name?" The girl's eyes focused on his face with surprising intensity. "Emma," she said.
"Emma Chen, where's my mom?"
"She was just here. She was keeping me warm." Jake felt something twist in his chest. How do you tell a 7-year-old that her mother died saving her life? How do you explain that sometimes love means letting go of everything, even your own survival, to give someone else a chance? "Your mom was very brave, Emma," he said carefully. "She made sure you stayed safe." Emma tried to sit up, but Vasquez gently pressed her back down. "Easy, sweetheart. You've been very sick, but you're getting better. I want to see my mom." Jake exchanged a look with the doctor. They'd dealt with survivors before, though never one so young. The standard protocol was clear: provide medical care, gather information, and transfer the individual to the nearest Colonial Authority processing center. But something about this situation felt different. "Emma, I need to ask you some questions, okay? Do you remember what happened to your ship?" The girl's eyes grew distant. "There were lights," she said slowly. "Bright lights outside the window. Mom said we had to get to the emergency pods." She was scared, but she was trying not to show it. She told me we were going on an adventure. "Do you have any family? Anyone we should contact?" Emma's face brightened slightly. "My daddy. He's a soldier, fighting the bad aliens. And my grandma and grandpa live on Earth, in Colorado. Mom said we were going to see them after we got to the new planet." Jake felt a spark of hope. If the girl had family on Earth, there might be a way to reunite her with them. But getting a civilian transport to Earth during wartime was nearly impossible, especially for one orphan child. "Emma, I want you to rest now, okay? We're going to take good care of you." As the girl drifted back to sleep, Jake walked to the observation deck. Outside, the debris field of the New Eden continued its silent dance through space. 12,000 people had died out there, their dreams of a new life reduced to scattered metal and frozen air. But one small girl had survived, kept alive by her mother's love and determination. He activated his comm unit and connected to Earth Command. The face of Admiral Sarah Harrison appeared on the screen, her expression as stern as always. "Morrison, what's your status?" "We've recovered all the life pods from the New Eden, Admiral." 48 total. 47 were empty. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "One survivor?" "A child. 7 years old." "Her mother died keeping her alive in the pod." "Understood. Transfer her to the Refugee Processing Center on Station Omega when you return." "Actually, Admiral, I'd like to request permission to take her to Earth. She has family there." Harrison's expression didn't change, but Jake could see the calculation in her eyes. "Commander, you know the regulations. All refugees must be processed through proper channels. We don't have resources to waste on individual transport requests. With respect, Admiral, this isn't just any refugee. She's the sole survivor of the New Eden. Her story could be valuable for Colonial Authority public relations. Show the galaxy that humanity doesn't give up, that we protect our own." It was a weak argument, and they both knew it. But Jake could see Harrison considering it. The Colonial Authority had been taking a beating in the press lately, with critics questioning whether the colonization program was worth the massive loss of life. "I'll consider it, Commander. Complete your salvage operation and return to headquarters. We'll discuss this further when you arrive." The connection ended, leaving Jake staring at the star-filled darkness outside. In the distance, he could see the running lights of other salvage ships working the debris field. Each one was pulling in the broken pieces of human dreams, cataloging the evidence of another defeat. But for the first time in months, Jake allowed himself to feel something other than resignation. One little girl had survived impossible odds, kept alive by a mother's love. If Emma Chen could beat death itself, maybe there was still hope for humanity among the stars. He just had to figure out how to get her home. In the medical bay, Emma slept fitfully, her small hand clutching the thermal blanket. In her dreams, she was back on the colony ship with her mother, looking out at the stars and talking about the new life waiting for them on the frontier. She didn't yet understand that some journeys end differently than they begin, or that sometimes the greatest adventure is simply finding your way back to where you belong. But Jake Morrison was beginning to understand that sometimes salvation comes not from winning the war, but from saving a single life. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. The journey back to Earth Command headquarters took 6 days through hyperspace, and with each passing day, Emma Chen grew stronger. She spent most of her time in the medical bay with Dr. Vasquez, who had taken on the unofficial role of surrogate guardian. Jake found himself checking on them frequently, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. "Tell me about your daddy," Dr. Vasquez said one morning as she ran her daily medical scans on Emma. The girl was sitting up now, her color much improved, though she still tired easily. Emma's face lit up with excitement. "His name is Captain David Chen. He flies big spaceships that fight the Zerathi. He has medals and everything. Mom said he's protecting Earth while we went to find our new home." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Chen was a common enough name, but military pilots were a small community. He'd heard of Captain David Chen. Everyone in the fleet had. The man was a legend, credited with 17 confirmed Zerathi kills and twice as many assists. He'd been missing in action for 8 months, last seen during the failed defense of the Tau Ceti colony. "Emma, when did you last see your father?" Jake asked gently.
The girl's expression grew thoughtful.
"It was my birthday, my 6th birthday. He gave me a necklace with a star on it." She reached under her hospital gown and pulled out a small silver pendant. "See? He said it would keep me safe until he came home." Jake examined the pendant. It was standard fleet issue, the kind given to pilot families. The star was actually a miniature beacon, designed to help rescue teams locate survivors. The fact that it had survived the pod crash was remarkable in itself. "He had to go fight the bad aliens right after my birthday," Emma continued, "but he promised he'd come back in time for Christmas. Mom said we might not be on Earth for Christmas, but Daddy would find us wherever we were." Jake's heart sank. If Captain Chen was who he thought it was, the man had been declared dead 4 months ago. His ship had been destroyed with all hands during the Tau Ceti evacuation. How do you tell a 7-year-old that her father isn't coming home for Christmas or any other day? "Commander Morrison to the bridge," came Lieutenant Chen's voice over the intercom. Jake made his way to the bridge, where he found his communications officer looking puzzled. "Sir, I'm picking up a priority transmission from Earth Command. It's encrypted with Admiral-level security codes. Put it through to my ready room." In the privacy of his quarters, Jake activated the secure communication array. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on the screen, but her expression was different from their last conversation. There was something that might have been excitement in her usually stern features. "Morrison, I've been looking into your passenger's background. Emma Chen's father isn't just any pilot. Captain David Chen, the Tau Ceti hero. I'm afraid I have bad news about—" "That's where you're wrong, Commander." Harrison's interruption was sharp. "Captain Chen isn't dead. He's alive, and he's been looking for his daughter for the past 3 weeks. Jake felt the deck seemed to shift beneath his feet. "That's impossible. His ship was destroyed at Tau Ceti." "His ship was destroyed, yes, but Chen and 3 of his crew made it to an escape pod. They've been drifting in dead space for 8 months, managing to stay alive on emergency rations and sheer determination. A patrol ship picked them up 2 days ago." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. He doesn't know about the New Eden. No. As far as he knows, his wife and daughter are safe in the Kepler system. Chen's been asking for transport there as soon as he's cleared medical. The doctors say he's suffering from severe malnutrition and psychological trauma, but he's stable. Jake sat down heavily. "Admiral, how do we tell a man who survived 8 months in space that his wife is dead and his daughter was nearly killed?" "Very carefully, Commander. And that's why I'm changing your orders. You're to proceed directly to Luna Station, where Captain Chen is being treated. I want you to personally oversee their reunion. Ma'am, with respect, wouldn't it be better to have professional counselors handle this? I'm not qualified for—" "You're the one who found her, Morrison. You're the one who saved her life. In Chen's eyes, you'll be a hero, not just another bureaucrat delivering bad news. Sometimes the human touch matters more than professional credentials." The transmission ended. leaving Jake alone with the weight of what lay ahead. Through the bulkhead, he could hear Emma laughing at something Dr. Vasquez had said. The sound was like music after weeks of silence and death. He made his way back to the medical bay, where Emma was playing with a small holo projector, creating butterflies that fluttered around the room in brilliant patterns of light. "Look, Commander Jake," she called out excitedly. "Dr. Elena taught me how to make them dance." Jake watched the display, marveling at the simple joy in the child's face. After everything she'd been through, she could still find wonder in light and movement. It was perhaps the most human thing he'd ever seen. "Emma, I have some news about your daddy." The holographic butterflies vanished as Emma's attention focused entirely on Jake. "Did you find him? Is he coming to get me?" "He's alive, sweetheart. He's been hurt, but he's getting better. We're going to take you to see him." Emma's squeal of joy echoed through the medical bay. She tried to jump off the bed, but Dr. Vasquez caught her gently. "When? When can I see him?" "In 2 days. But Emma, I need to tell you something important. Your daddy doesn't know what happened to you and your mom yet. He's been lost in space for a long time, and he doesn't know about the attack on your ship." Emma's expression grew serious beyond her years. "So he doesn't know about Mom?" Jake knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to Emma's eye level. "No, he doesn't. It's going to be very hard for him to understand. Your daddy loved your mom very much." "I know." Emma's voice was small but steady. "Mom used to read me his letters. He said she was the most beautiful woman in the galaxy, and that he loved us both more than all the stars." There is access as the Resilience made its way toward Luna Station. Jake found himself spending more and more time with Emma. She told him stories about her life before the attack, painting pictures of a happy family scattered across the galaxy by war but held together by love. Her father, according to Emma, was larger than life. He could fix anything, fly anything, and always knew exactly what to do when things went wrong. Her mother was quieter but equally strong, the kind of woman who could calm a crying child with a song or turn a cramped spaceship cabin into a home with nothing but creativity and determination. They met at a dance, Emma told him one evening as they sat in the observation deck watching the stars streak past. Daddy was on leave, and Mom was working at a hospital on Mars. He said he knew the moment he saw her that she was going to be his wife. Did she feel the same way? Emma giggled. Mom said he was too confident and his uniform was too shiny. But he kept coming back to the hospital, pretending to be sick so he could see her. Finally, she agreed to go dancing with him just to get rid of him. But it worked out. Mom said it was the best decision she ever made, except for having me. Emma's expression grew wistful. "Do you think Daddy will be okay when we tell him about Mom?" Jake considered the question carefully. How do you explain grief to a child who's already lost so much? "I think your daddy will be very sad, but I also think seeing you alive and safe will help him remember that good things can still happen even when everything seems hopeless." Luna Station appeared in their viewports like a glittering jewel against the curve of the moon. The massive medical facility served as the primary treatment center for military personnel injured in the ongoing war. As the Resilience docked, Jake felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. Dr. Vasquez had insisted on accompanying Emma to the reunion, and Jake was grateful for her presence. The pediatrician had become genuinely attached to the girl over the past week, and Emma trusted her completely. They made their way through the station's sterile corridors, past wards filled with wounded soldiers and survivors of various attacks. Emma walked between them, her small hand gripping Jake's with surprising strength. She was wearing a new jumpsuit provided by the station's supply department, and her dark hair had been carefully braided by Dr. Vasquez. Captain David Chen was in the psychiatric ward, a sign of the mental trauma he'd endured during his months adrift in space. The attending physician, Dr. Marcus Webb, met them outside his room. "He's physically stable," Webb reported quietly. "Malnutrition and muscle atrophy, but nothing that won't heal with time. Psychologically, he's been fixated on getting to the Kepler system to find his family. We've sedated him twice when he tried to leave against medical advice." "How much have you told him?" Jake asked. "Nothing about the attack. We felt it would be better coming from you, given the circumstances." Through the observation window, Jake could see Captain Chen sitting on his bed, staring out at the Earth hanging in space beyond the station. The man looked older than his 35 years, his face gaunt from months of starvation. But there was still something unbroken in his posture, a determination that had kept him alive when most would have given up. Emma pressed her face against the window. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my daddy." Jake took a deep breath. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Emma nodded, her small face set with the same determination he'd seen in her father. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, Jake knew that the love between this father and daughter would survive it. It had already survived impossible odds. He opened the door. Captain Chen looked up at the sound, and his face went through a series of expressions so rapid they were almost impossible to follow. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, overwhelming joy. "Emma?" he whispered. "Daddy!" Emma ran across the room and threw herself into her father's arms. Chen caught her and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply held each other, a father and daughter reunited against all odds. "I knew you'd find me," Emma said finally. "I told everyone you'd find me." Chen looked over his daughter's head at Jake, his eyes bright with tears and questions. "Commander, I don't understand. How is she here? Where's my wife? What happened to the New Eden?" Jake met the man's gaze steadily. "Captain Chen, we need to talk." The conversation that followed would haunt Jake Morrison for the rest of his life. He watched as Captain David Chen's world collapsed and rebuilt itself in the space of 30 minutes, his emotions cycling through denial, rage, devastation, and finally a kind of fierce gratitude that left them all emotionally drained. Emma sat curled in her father's lap throughout the entire ordeal, her small hand resting on his chest as if anchoring him to reality. She was the one who told him about her mother's final moments, her 7-year-old voice steady and clear as she described how Mommy had kept her warm until the very end. "She said to tell you that she loved you more than all the stars," Emma finished, pulling out the silver pendant he'd given her. "And this kept me safe, just like you promised." Chen closed his eyes, his hand trembling as he touched the necklace. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She always said you were the best thing we ever made together." Jake excused himself to give them privacy, stepping into the corridor where Dr. Webb was waiting with a concerned expression. "How's he taking it?" the psychiatrist asked. "Better than I expected. Having Emma with him is helping more than any medication could. The girl seems remarkably resilient for someone who's been through such trauma." Jake nodded, thinking about the strength he'd seen in Emma over the past week. "She gets it from both parents, I think. Her mother died protecting her, and her father survived 8 months in space through sheer willpower. That kind of determination doesn't skip generations." They were interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Harrison, her expression uncharacteristically soft as she approached. Behind her walked an elderly couple that Jake didn't recognize, a man with silver hair and kind eyes, and a woman whose face bore a striking resemblance to Emma's. "Commander Morrison," the Admiral said, "I'd like you to meet Robert and Margaret Chen, Emma's grandparents." The reunion that followed was even more emotional than the first. The elderly couple had been contacted as soon as Emma's identity was confirmed, and they'd traveled from Colorado as quickly as civilian transport would allow. Margaret Chen wept openly as she held her granddaughter for the first time in 2 years, while Robert Chen gripped his son's hand as if afraid he might disappear again. "We thought we'd lost you both," Margaret whispered to David. "When the fleet listed you as missing in action, and then the news about the New Eden, we thought our family was gone." David Chen looked around the small hospital room at the faces surrounding him, his daughter, his parents, and the strangers who had risked everything to save what remained of his family. Jake could see the man struggling to process the reality of his situation. His wife was dead, but his daughter lived. His ship was destroyed, but he'd been rescued. The colony they'd dreamed of building was ashes, but the family they'd wanted to give a better life was together again. "Commander Morrison," David said finally, turning to face Jake, "Dr. Webb tells me you're the one who found Emma." "My crew found her, sir. I just made sure we didn't give up looking. In 8 months drifting in space, do you know what kept me alive? It was the thought of seeing my girls again. The thought of holding Emma and telling her bedtime stories, of kissing my wife good morning." His voice cracked slightly. "Half of that dream is gone forever. But the other half is sitting right here, alive, because you didn't stop searching." Jake felt uncomfortable under the weight of the man's gratitude. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No, Commander. Anyone would have followed standard procedure. You went beyond that." Admiral Harrison stepped forward. "Which brings me to why I'm here. Captain Chen, pending your medical clearance, Fleet Command is prepared to offer you a choice. You can take extended family leave and retire to civilian life, or you can return to active duty with a new assignment." David looked down at Emma, who had fallen asleep in his arms. "What kind of assignment?" "Command of a new initiative. We're forming specialized search and rescue units dedicated to finding survivors of Zerathai attacks. The program needs officers who understand what it means to be lost in the dark. You want me to do for other families what Commander Morrison did for mine." "Exactly." Jake watched the conversation with growing understanding. This wasn't just about one family's reunion. It was about changing how humanity responded to loss. Instead of simply cataloging the dead, they were going to start fighting harder for the living. "I'll need time to think about it," David said finally. "And I'll need to know my family is safe." Margaret Chen spoke up from her chair beside the bed. "We've already discussed this, son. Emma is welcome to live with us on Earth for as long as you need. She'll be safe, loved, and close enough to visit whenever you're on leave." "I want to go with Grandma and Grandpa," Emma said sleepily from her father's arms. "They have a big house with a garden, and Grandma makes cookies that taste like stars." Jake smiled at the description, remembering his own grandmother's cooking. There was something profoundly right about the idea of Emma growing up in a garden instead of the sterile corridors of a spaceship. Over the next few days, as the paperwork was processed and arrangements were made, Jake found himself reluctant to leave Luna Station. He'd grown attached to Emma during their week together, and saying goodbye felt like losing part of his own family. On his last day at the station, he sat with Emma in the children's ward recreation room, watching her play with the other young patients. She'd made friends quickly, her natural warmth drawing other children to her like plants toward sunlight. "Commander Jake," she said, looking up from the puzzle she was working on, "will I see you again?" "I hope so, sweetheart. But I'll be out there looking for other people who need help." "Like you helped me?" Just like that, Emma considered this seriously. "Mom used to say that angels were just people who showed up when other people needed them most. I think you're an angel, Commander Jake." Jake felt his throat tighten. "Your mom sounds like she was a very wise woman." "She was, and she would have liked you." That evening, Jake joined the Chen family for dinner in the station's civilian quarters. It was a strange gathering, a military hero recovering from trauma, elderly grandparents adjusting to sudden responsibility, and a little girl who'd survived the impossible. But somehow, it worked. They were building something new from the broken pieces of their old life. "I've decided to take the assignment," David announced over dessert. "The search and rescue program." His father nodded approvingly. "Your mother always said you were meant for something special." "Every family deserves the chance Emma got," David continued. "No one should have to wonder what happened to their loved ones." Jake raised his glass of water in a toast. "To second chances?" "To the people who make them possible," David replied, looking directly at Jake. As Jake prepared to leave the station the next morning, he found Emma waiting for him at the docking bay. She was wearing a new dress her grandmother had bought her, her hair tied back with a bright blue ribbon. "I made you something," she said shyly, holding out a folded piece of paper. Jake unfolded it to reveal a drawing done in colored pencils. It showed the Resilience floating among the stars, with stick figures visible in the windows. At the bottom, in carefully printed letters, it read, "Thank you for finding me. Love, Emma." "It's beautiful," Jake said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "I'll keep it always." Emma hugged him tightly. "Promise me you'll keep looking for people, Commander Jake. Promise me you won't stop." "I promise." As the Resilience pulled away from Luna Station, Jake watched the facility shrink into the distance. Somewhere inside that collection of metal and ceramic, a little girl was starting a new life with her father and grandparents. In a few months, she'd be running through gardens on Earth, going to school with other children, and slowly healing from the trauma that had nearly destroyed her. But she'd also carry with her the memory of her mother's sacrifice and her father's determination. She'd grow up knowing that love could survive impossible odds, and that sometimes the greatest heroes were the ones who simply refused to give up looking. Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, we're receiving new orders from Fleet Command. What's our destination?" "The Vega system." "A colony ship went missing 3 days ago. We're part of the new search and rescue task force." Jake smiled as he made his way to the bridge. The Resilience was no longer just a salvage vessel collecting the debris of human dreams. It was something more important, a ship of hope, crewed by people who understood that sometimes salvation comes from simply refusing to accept that hope is lost. Behind them, Earth grew smaller in their wake. Ahead lay the dark reaches of space where other families might be waiting for rescue, other children who needed someone to find them when all seemed lost. Jake thought of Emma's drawing, now carefully tucked into his personal files. He thought of her promise to remember the people who'd helped her, and his promise to keep looking for others who needed help. In the grand scheme of the war between humanity and the Zarathi, one little girl's rescue might seem insignificant. But Jake was beginning to understand that wars weren't won by grand gestures alone. They were won by countless small acts of courage, by people who chose to reach out their hand to a stranger in the dark. The universe was vast and often cruel, But it was also filled with David Chens who would survive 8 months in space for love, mothers who would give their lives to keep their children warm, and grandfathers who would drop everything to welcome home a frightened little girl. And sometimes, if you looked hard enough and refused to give up, you could find them all and bring them home. 6 months after Emma Chen's rescue, the new search and rescue initiative had evolved from a desperate hope into a formidable force. Jake Morrison now commanded a fleet of 12 ships, each one equipped with the most advanced scanning equipment the Colonial Authority could provide. They'd saved 43 people from the wreckage of Zarathi attacks, a number that seemed small until you multiplied it by the families who no longer had to wonder what happened to their loved ones. The Resilience remained Jake's flagship, but it had been extensively modified for its new role. Where once there had been cargo holds for salvaged materials, now there were medical bays and trauma counseling centers. The ship had become a floating hospital, ready to provide immediate care to survivors who might have been drifting in space for weeks or months. Jake stood on the bridge watching the Vega system's primary star grow larger in the viewport. This was their 15th rescue mission, and each one taught them something new about survival in the void. They'd learned that Zarathi attack patterns often left pockets of debris that could shelter life pods from detection. They discovered that human ingenuity could stretch emergency supplies far beyond their intended duration. Most importantly, they'd learned that hope was sometimes the only thing keeping people alive in the dark. "Contact bearing 37 Mark 12, reported Ensign Martinez, who had replaced Lieutenant Chen when she'd been promoted to command her own rescue vessel. "It's faint, but definitely artificial. Take us in." Standard approach. The signal led them to a damaged cargo hauler drifting silently through the asteroid belt. The ship had been gutted by Zarathi plasma fire, its hull cracked open like a broken egg. Sensors were picking up life signs in what remained of the engineering section. "This is impossible," Dr. Haddon Vasquez said, studying her readings. The doctor had volunteered to transfer to Jake's command when the rescue initiative launched, unable to imagine returning to routine medical duties after her experience with Emma. "That section has been exposed to vacuum for at least 4 days. Nothing could survive in there." "That's what we said about Emma," Jake reminded her. "Let's take a look." The rescue team suited up and crossed to the derelict cargo hauler through the vacuum of space. The engineering section was a twisted maze of broken conduits and collapsed bulkheads, but at its heart they found something remarkable, a makeshift shelter built from cargo containers and sealed with emergency foam. Inside they found 3 people, 2 adults and a teenage boy, huddled around a failing life support unit that should have run out of power days ago. They were unconscious from oxygen deprivation, but alive. "How is this possible?" asked Sergeant Torres, as they prepared the survivors for transport. Jake examined the shelter more closely and found his answer. The life support unit had been extensively modified, its power consumption reduced by 70% through a series of clever engineering tricks. Someone had sacrificed heating, artificial gravity, and most of the environmental controls to keep the oxygen recyclers running for as long as possible. They turned their shelter into a hibernation chamber, he explained to his team, lowered their metabolism, rationed their air supply, and waited for rescue. "It's brilliant." The survivors were brought aboard the Resilience and immediately taken to the medical bay. Dr. Vasquez worked frantically to stabilize them while Jake reviewed their identification records. The family name was Torres, no relation to his sergeant, and according to their files, they were engineers heading to a new mining colony in the outer system. When the teenage boy regained consciousness 12 hours later, his first words were, "Did it work? Are we alive?" "You're alive," Jake assured him. "All 3 of you."
"What's your name, son?"
"Miguel Torres. That's my mom and dad." He gestured weakly toward the other beds where his parents were still recovering. "When the attack happened, we barely made it to the cargo hold. Dad said we had to make the life support last longer, so we started taking it apart and putting it back together differently. Your father's modifications saved your lives." Miguel managed a weak smile. "Dad always said that problems are just puzzles waiting to be solved. He taught me that giving up is just choosing not to think hard enough." Jake felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Here was another family held together by love and determination, another example of humanity's stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Miguel's father had literally rebuilt their life support system from scratch, turning certain death into a chance at survival. Over the next few days, as the Torres family recovered, Jake found himself thinking about the patterns they'd discovered in their rescue work. Each survivor had a story of impossible odds overcome through ingenuity, love, or simple refusal to give up. It was as if the human spirit became stronger when faced with absolute darkness. Their next mission took them to the edge of Colonial Authority space, where the passenger liner Golden Dawn had vanished 3 weeks earlier. The ship had been carrying 800 colonists to a new world, including several families with young children. "I'm not detecting any debris," Ensign Martinez reported as they approached the ship's last known coordinates. "Whatever happened here, it was different from the usual Zerathi attack pattern." Jake studied the sensor readings with growing unease. The Golden Dawn was simply gone, as if it had vanished into the void without a trace. No wreckage, no distress beacon, no signs of combat. It was as if the ship and everyone aboard had simply ceased to exist. "Expand the search grid," he ordered. "Start with a 50-kilometer radius and work outward." For 2 days they searched, finding nothing but empty space and cosmic dust. Jake was beginning to consider the possibility that the Golden Dawn had suffered a catastrophic engine failure that had vaporized the entire ship when Martinez called out from her station. "Commander, I'm picking up a signal. It's music." "Music?" "Classical music. Very faint, but definitely artificial." Bearing 09 Mark 15. The signal led them to what appeared to be empty space, but as they drew closer, their sensors began detecting an anomaly, a region where space itself seemed slightly distorted, like looking through imperfect glass. "Cloaking field," breathed Dr. Vasquez. "But not Zerathi technology. It's human," Jake realized. The Golden Dawn activated some kind of experimental stealth system. They broadcast on all emergency frequencies, identifying themselves and requesting permission to approach. The response came back immediately, a voice thick with relief and exhaustion. "Resilience. This is Captain Sarah Kim of the Golden Dawn. We've been hiding here for 3 weeks waiting for rescue. Our engines are dead, and our life support is failing, but everyone is alive. The reunion that followed was unlike anything Jake had experienced. 800 people who had given themselves up for dead suddenly found themselves rescued by the very initiative that had been created to find the lost. As the survivors were transferred to the rescue fleet, Jake met with Captain Kim to understand what had happened. Experimental stealth technology, she explained as they stood in the Golden Dawn's darkened bridge. It was supposed to be tested on unmanned cargo ships, but when the Zerathi attacked, I had to make a choice. Hide and hope for rescue, or run and get picked off like all the others. You saved 800 lives. I risked 800 lives on untested technology. If you hadn't found us, but we did find us, that's what we do now." Captain Kim looked out at the rescue ships surrounding her vessel, their lights blazing like stars in the darkness. "When this war started, I thought humanity was doomed. We were so outmatched, so unprepared. But seeing what you've built here, what you're doing, maybe we have more fight in us than I thought." The evacuation of the Golden Dawn took 3 days, during which Jake had the opportunity to meet many of the passengers. There were farmers and engineers, teachers and doctors, all seeking a new life among the stars. The attack had taken away their destination, but not their determination to build something better for their children. One conversation in particular stayed with Jake long after the mission was complete. He was checking on the children's ward when he encountered a little girl named Sophia, who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. She was sitting alone, drawing pictures with colored pencils. "What are you drawing?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "My house," she said proudly, showing him a picture of a small building surrounded by green fields. "This is where I'm going to live when we get to our new planet." "That's a beautiful house. Will you live there with your family?" Sophia's expression grew sad. "My mommy and daddy died before we got on the big ship, but Chen says there will be new families on the planet who will want a little girl like me." Jake felt his breath catch. "Mrs. Chen? She takes care of all the kids who don't have families. She's really nice, and she tells the best stories." Jake made his way through the ship until he found the woman Sophia had mentioned. Margaret Chen, Emma's grandmother, was sitting in what had once been the Golden Dawn's restaurant, surrounded by a dozen children of various ages. She was reading to them from an electronic tablet, her voice warm and comforting as she told them about brave princes and clever princesses. "Mrs. Chen," Jake said when the story was finished. "I didn't expect to see you here." Margaret looked up with a smile of recognition. "Commander Morrison, what a wonderful surprise. I should have known you'd be the one to find us. What are you doing on a colony ship?" "Robert and I decided we were too old to sit at home while the galaxy was falling apart. We volunteered with the Colonial Authority's Orphan Relocation Program." She gestured to the children around her. "These little ones lost their families to the war, but they still deserve a chance at a new life." Jake looked at the children's faces, seeing hope and determination that reminded him powerfully of Emma. These kids had lost everything, but they hadn't lost their belief in tomorrow. It was perhaps the most human thing he'd ever witnessed. "How is Emma?" he asked. "Thriving. She's in school now, making friends and getting into the kind of harmless trouble that 7-year-olds specialize in. She asks about you constantly. And her father? David's been promoted to admiral in charge of the entire search and rescue initiative. He credits you with saving more than just his daughter's life. You gave him a new purpose." As Jake made his way back to the Resilience, he thought about the interconnected web of lives they'd been weaving through their rescue work. Emma's survival had led to the creation of the Search and Rescue Initiative. The initiative had saved hundreds of people, including these orphaned children who would now have a chance to build new families on the frontier. Each rescue created ripples that spread outward, touching lives in ways they might never fully understand. Miguel Torres would grow up to become an engineer, using the problem-solving skills his father had taught him. Sophia and the other orphans would find new families and new hope. The passengers of the Golden Dawn would eventually reach their new world, carrying with them the knowledge that humanity would never stop looking for its lost children. That night, alone in his quarters, Jake received a message from Earth. It was a video recording from Emma, now 8 years old and grinning at the camera from what appeared to be her grandparents' garden. "Hi, Commander Jake. I hope you're finding lots of people and bringing them home. I wanted to show you my garden. See, I planted flowers in the shape of a star, just like my necklace. Grandma says they'll bloom next spring, and when they do, I'll send you pictures." The recording continued for several minutes, Emma chattering about school and friends and her father's work, but it was the ending that stayed with Jake long after the message finished. "I remember what you told me about being an angel," Emma said, her expression growing serious. "About showing up when people need help most. I want to be an angel too when I grow up. I want to help people the way you helped me." Jake turned off the recording and looked out at the stars. Somewhere among those points of light, other families were waiting for rescue. Other children were counting on someone to find them when all hope seemed lost. The war with the Zerathi continued, and humanity was still outmatched in terms of pure military might. But Jake was beginning to understand that wars weren't always won by the side with the biggest guns. Sometimes they were won by the side that simply refused to abandon its own people, no matter how dark the circumstances became. The Search and Rescue Initiative had saved hundreds of lives in 6 months, but more than that, it had proven something important about human nature. That love could survive impossible odds, that families would find ways to stay together across the vast emptiness of space, and that sometimes the greatest victory was simply bringing someone home. In the depths of space, the Resilience changed course toward their next mission. Behind them, the rescued passengers of the Golden Dawn were beginning new lives. Ahead, other people were waiting to be found. And Jake Morrison, guardian of the lost and shepherd of the found, continued his work of proving that in the vast darkness of the universe, no one was ever truly alone. 2 years after Emma Chen's rescue, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Search and Rescue Initiative had grown from Jake Morrison's small fleet into a massive operation spanning dozens of star systems. Admiral David Chen commanded over 200 specialized vessels, each one dedicated to finding humanity's lost children among the stars. But the greatest change wasn't in ships or technology, it was in how humanity viewed itself. The endless stream of rescue stories, of families reunited against impossible odds, had given people something they'd almost forgotten: hope. Instead of seeing themselves as victims of an overwhelming enemy, humans began to understand that they were survivors, builders, and most importantly, protectors of each other. Jake stood on the observation deck of the new rescue station orbiting Proxima Centauri, watching the steady stream of ships coming and going below. The station had been built from the hull of a decommissioned battleship, converted into a massive medical and processing facility for rescued civilians. It was staffed by volunteers from across human space, people who had given up comfortable lives to be part of something larger than themselves. "Admiral Morrison," came a familiar voice behind him. Jake turned to see Admiral David Chen approaching, his face bearing the kind of deep satisfaction that came from meaningful work. The man had aged well over the past 2 years, the gauntness of his ordeal replaced by the solid build of someone who slept well at night knowing he'd made a difference. "David, I still can't get used to the title." "You'll have to." "The Colonial Authority made it official this morning. Congratulations, Admiral." Jake accepted the promotion with mixed feelings. Part of him missed the simplicity of commanding a single ship, of personally participating in every rescue. But he understood the necessity of command structure as their operation expanded. Someone had to coordinate the bigger picture while others handled the hands-on work. "How many active rescues do we have running?" he asked. 17. Everything from a stranded survey team in the Vega system to a colony ship that's been missing for 6 months near the galactic rim. But I didn't come here to talk about routine operations. David's expression grew serious as he handed Jake a secure datapad. We've received intelligence about something unprecedented, a joint operation between our initiative and the Zerathi. Jake nearly dropped the pad. That's impossible. They don't take prisoners and they don't negotiate. Apparently there are exceptions. Read the brief. The intelligence report told an incredible story. A group of Zerathi civilians, scientists and their families, had been aboard a research vessel when it was attacked by their own military for reasons that weren't entirely clear. The ship had been damaged and was drifting in neutral space, its occupants alive but stranded. More incredibly, the Zerathi civilians had managed to send a message to human authorities requesting asylum in exchange for information about their species and culture. It was an unprecedented opportunity for peace, but also an enormous risk. The colonial authority wants us to attempt a rescue, David continued. If we can save these Zerathi civilians, it might open the door to negotiations, end the war. Jake studied the report carefully. The Zerathi ship was located in a region of space known to be patrolled by their military. Any rescue attempt would be extremely dangerous, with a high probability of being intercepted by hostile forces. What kind of ship are we talking about? Scientific vessel, minimal armament, approximately 50 civilians aboard, including children. Jake felt something stir in his chest. Children. Even alien children deserved a chance at life, a chance at a future free from violence and fear. He thought of Emma Chen, now 10 years old and thriving in her grandparents' care. She'd grown into a remarkable young girl, her natural empathy and intelligence shaped by her early experiences with loss and recovery. I'll take the mission personally, Jake decided. The resilience and a small escort fleet. If this goes wrong, I don't want to risk our entire operation. Jake, you don't have to. Yes, I do. This is what we do, David. We find the lost and bring them home. It doesn't matter what species they are. The mission planning took 3 days, during which Jake assembled a volunteer crew from his most experienced officers. Dr. Vasquez insisted on participating, arguing that xenobiology expertise might be crucial for treating injured Zerathi civilians. Sergeant Torres, now promoted to lieutenant, volunteered to lead the security team. But the most surprising volunteer was Emma Chen herself. She arrived at the station with her father, having convinced both her grandparents and her school to let her participate in what she called the most important mission ever. At 10 years old, she was remarkably poised and articulate, her experiences having given her a maturity beyond her years. I want to help, she announced to Jake as they sat in his office overlooking the docking bays. These alien people are lost, just like I was. Maybe if they see a human child being kind to them, they'll understand that we're not all soldiers and weapons. Jake looked to David, who shrugged helplessly. Try arguing with her. She gets that stubborn streak from her mother. Emma, this mission is extremely dangerous. If something goes wrong, then you'll fix it, Emma interrupted with the absolute confidence that only children could muster. You've never failed to bring someone home, Commander Jake. I trust you. Against his better judgment, Jake agreed to let Emma participate, but only as part of the communications team, and with strict instructions to stay away from any potential combat zones. Her presence would indeed send a powerful message about human intentions, but he prayed it wouldn't put her in harm's way. The journey to the rendezvous coordinates took 4 days through hyperspace. Jake spent most of that time studying what little information humanity had gathered about Zerathi culture and biology. The species was remarkably similar to humans in many ways. Bipedal, carbon-based, with complex social structures and advanced technology. Main difference seemed to be their more rigid caste system and their apparent inability to conceive of peaceful coexistence with other species. The Zerathi research vessel appeared on their screens exactly where the intelligence reports had predicted. It was a sleek, organic-looking craft that seemed more grown than built, its hull covered in flowing curves and bioluminescent patterns that pulsed weakly with failing power. They're alive, Dr. Vasquez reported from her sensors. I'm detecting approximately 47 life signs, all within normal parameters for their species, but their life support systems are critically low on power. Jake activated the communications system, broadcasting on the frequency the Zerathi civilians had provided. Zerathi vessel, this is Admiral Morrison of the human rescue ship Resilience. We're here to help. The response came back in heavily accented but understandable English. Admiral Morrison, this is Dr. Zethkara of the research vessel Song of Stars. We are grateful beyond words for your response to our distress call. Doctor, we're prepared to evacuate your people to safety. Can you prepare your civilians for emergency transport? There was a long pause before the Zerathi scientist responded. Admiral, there is something you must understand. Our ship was attacked because we discovered something that our military leadership considered dangerous to their worldview. We have evidence that our two species share common evolutionary ancestors. We are not as different as either side believes. Jake felt his heart race. If true, such information could indeed change the entire nature of the conflict. Doctor, we can discuss this once you and your people are safe. Right now our priority is getting you out of hostile space. The evacuation proceeded smoothly at first. The Zerathi civilians were remarkably similar to humans in their basic needs. They breathed a similar atmosphere, required comparable temperatures, and their children clung to their parents with the same mixture of fear and trust that Jake had seen in human families. Emma proved invaluable during the process, her natural warmth and genuine curiosity helping to ease the fears of the younger Zerathi. Despite the obvious differences in appearance, the aliens had slightly larger eyes, elongated limbs, and skin that shifted color with their emotions. She treated them exactly as she would any other children in need of help. Your offspring is remarkable, Dr. Zethkara told Jake, as they watched Emma playing simple games with a group of young Zerathi. She shows no fear, no prejudice. In our society, children are taught from birth to distrust other species. Emma has learned that being different doesn't make someone dangerous, Jake replied. She's been through her own trauma and understands what it means to need help. They were halfway through the evacuation when the Zerathi military arrived. 3 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons already charging for an attack. The lead vessel immediately broadcast a demand for the humans to surrender the traitors and criminals they were harboring. All ships, battle stations, Jake ordered, though he knew their small rescue fleet was no match for Zerathi military vessels. Dr. Zethkara, how long until your people are completely evacuated? 10 minutes, perhaps less. We may not have 10 minutes. The Zerathi warships open fire, their plasma weapons lighting up space with deadly beauty. Jake's escort vessels returned fire, their smaller weapons doing little damage but buying precious time for the evacuation to continue. Commander, the lead Zerathi ship is hailing us, reported Ensign Martinez. Put them through. The face that appeared on the screen was unlike any Zerathi Jake had seen before. This one's features were harder, more angular, and its skin held a permanent deep red coloration that spoke of constant anger. Human Admiral, the Zerathi military leader said, its voice like grinding metal. You harbor criminals who have betrayed their own kind. Surrender them now, and we will allow your fleet to withdraw. I'm afraid I can't do that, Jake replied calmly. These people asked for our help, and we don't abandon those who trust us. Then you will die with them. The transmission cut off, and the Zerathi warships intensified their attack. One of Jake's escort vessels took a direct hit, its shields failing in a cascade of sparks and energy discharges. Evacuation complete, called Dr. Vasquez from the medical bay. All Zerathi civilians are aboard and secure. All ships prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace, Jake ordered. But before they could activate their jump drives, something unexpected happened. The Song of Stars, which should have been powerless and drifting, suddenly blazed to life. Its bioluminescent hull patterns flared with brilliant light, and it moved to place itself between Jake's fleet and the attacking warships. Dr. Zethkara, what are you doing? Jake demanded over the communication channel. Admiral, my ship still has enough power for one final action. We are transmitting all of our research data to your vessel, proof of our shared evolutionary history, evidence that this war is based on false assumptions about our species' fundamental incompatibility. The Song of Stars opened fire on the Zerathi military vessels, its weapons systems powered by what must have been the ship's entire remaining energy reserves. The attack was more symbolic than effective, but it sent a clear message. These Zerathi had chosen their side. The military vessels responded with overwhelming force, reducing the Song of Stars to debris within seconds. But those seconds were enough for Jake's fleet to complete their hyperspace calculations and vanish into the safety of faster-than-light travel. As the rescue fleet emerged from hyperspace near the Proxima Centauri station, Jake found himself in the medical bay where the Zerathi civilians were being treated. Despite their obvious grief at the loss of their ship and research station, they showed remarkable resilience. Many were already asking how they could contribute to the human war effort, eager to prove that peaceful coexistence was possible. Emma sat with a young Zerathi who couldn't have been much older than herself, the two of them communicating through simple drawings and gestures despite the language barrier. It was a perfect example of what Dr. Zethkara had died trying to prove, that the differences between their species were superficial compared to their fundamental similarities. Admiral, Dr. Zethkara approached Jake, his skin showing the blue patterns that indicated deep sadness among his people. "We cannot adequately express our gratitude for what you have done. You risked everything to save people who were, until today, your enemies." "You're not our enemies," Jake replied. "You're just people who needed help. That simple perspective may change the course of this war. The data we transmitted to your ship contains decades of research proving that our species diverged from a common ancestor only a few million years ago. We are, quite literally, cousins who have forgotten their family connection." Over the following weeks, as the Zerathi refugees settled into life aboard the rescue station, the information they'd provided began to transform humanity's understanding of the conflict. The war wasn't an inevitable clash between incompatible species. It was a family feud that had spiraled out of control, fueled by misunderstanding and fear. More importantly, other Zerathi scientists began reaching out through covert channels. Word of Dr. Zethkara's successful asylum request had spread through their scientific community like wildfire, and many were willing to risk everything for the chance to pursue research without military interference. Jake stood once again on the observation deck of the rescue station, but now he was watching a very different kind of traffic. Alongside the usual rescue ships, there were diplomatic vessels carrying Zerathi defectors, scientists, and families seeking a new life among the humans who had shown them kindness. Emma joined him at the viewing window, now 11 years old and serving as an unofficial ambassador to the growing Zerathi refugee population. Her natural empathy had made her invaluable in helping the aliens adjust to human society. "Commander Jake," she said, using the old title out of habit, "do you think the war will really end?" Jake considered the question carefully. In the past month, 3 more Zerathi research vessels had requested asylum, and intelligence reports suggested growing unrest within their military command structure. The information provided by Dr. Zethkara's team had been transmitted throughout human space, fundamentally changing how people viewed their former enemies. "I think it's possible," he said finally. "Wars usually end when both sides realize they have more to gain from peace than from fighting. And if it doesn't end, then we keep doing what we do best. We find the lost, and we bring them home, whether they're human or Zerathi or something else entirely." Emma nodded solemnly, then broke into the bright smile that had charmed countless refugees over the past 3 years. "I can live with that." As the twin stars of the Proxima Centauri system set behind the curve of the planet below, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. It had started with one little girl found in the wreckage of her destroyed ship, kept alive by her mother's love and her own stubborn refusal to give up. That single rescue had grown into an initiative that had saved thousands of lives and might now save an entire civilization from the tragedy of endless war. It was proof of something Jake had always believed but rarely dared to voice, that individual acts of compassion could change the course of history. Somewhere in human space, children were growing up who had never known the fear of being abandoned in the dark. Former enemies were learning to trust each other through shared work and common goals, and the galaxy itself was slowly becoming a place where being lost didn't mean being forgotten. Jake Morrison had set out to be a simple salvage operator, collecting the debris of humanity's dreams. Instead, he had become something far more important, a guardian of hope, a shepherd of the lost, and living proof that in the vast darkness of space, love could indeed light the way home. The war between humans and Zerathi would continue for several more months, but its end was already written in the faces of the children, playing together in the station's corridors, human and alien alike, building friendships that would last a lifetime. Emma Chen, survivor of the New Eden disaster and unofficial ambassador to the stars, continued her work of proving that the best victories were measured not in enemies defeated, but in families reunited. And in the medical bay of the rescue station, another small miracle was taking place as Dr. Vasquez delivered the first half-human, half-Xerathi child ever born, a living symbol of the peace that was finally within reach. The galaxy was vast and often dangerous, but it was also full of people willing to reach out their hands to strangers in the dark. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything.